All right, guys. So, good morning one more time. I officially welcome you to this wonderful session we have set up for you today. My name is Leo. I am a singer-songwriter, noisemaker. I kind of been in studios, in and out of studios, in and out of stages. That's pretty much all I do all the time. And today I do some work with the Merrill Center as well. And I have really great colleagues like my co-host today, John. He is one of the members of the audio team at the Merrill Center. He's an audio engineering professional, and he's also here. He's going to be sort of helping us with questions from you that you're going to put in the chat, but also he's going to be kind of coming in and out and chatting with us. And then finally, we have our guest today, which I'm very grateful to have. He is not only a friend and someone I respect and admire as a working musician, but also as a professional, as a human being. I am really grateful to know him, to have learned from him, and to this day I'm always learning. Mr. Chris Goyzueta, welcome to this podcast clinic, and thank you for being here.
Hey, Leo, what's going on? Thanks for having me. That was a really sweet intro. Thanks so much for that. It's good to have great friends like you.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. This is fundamentally a Q&A. I know that you have a wealth of knowledge in the music industry, and but what I kind of wanted to start with to kind of just give everybody a little bit of a background and understand, I guess, kind of what the topic of your content online is and all that stuff. I think the first thing would be to understand a little bit of your background. So if you just kind of run us through a little bit of where you came from, I guess.
Sounds good. I went to UCF in Orlando, Florida, University of Central Florida, and I wanted to be a doctor. I was a personal trainer at the time. I know I don't look it anymore these days, but I was a personal trainer at the time, and I wanted to do more for my clients. So I was like, the only way I can do more is go to medical school and like really learn about their body and their health. But always been a giant music fan. I would go to probably anywhere from 10 to 15 shows a month all throughout high school. One month I went to 25 shows. That's how obsessed I was with live music. And when you're a doctor or going to the doctor, like the pre-med route, you usually either go the research route or like the community activism route where you can like help out in the community. And for me, that was what spoke to me. So I started this organization called Rock for Hunger. It was supposed to be like a one-time concert at UCF, and it turned into a nonprofit organization. We held an annual music festival in Orlando. It's a one-day small music festival for like 1,000 people. Did that, and then that led to me managing some of the bands that played the first festival, to booking them shows around town, to booking a venue in downtown Orlando. It was a small club. It used to be called Central Station. I don't know if you remember that place.
Yeah.
So I booked shows there, and then I wanted to bring Rock for Hunger 3 to the Plaza Live in Orlando. For if there's anyone that's not from Orlando that's listening, it's like a 1,500 standing room venue, but at the time was only seated. They had permanent seats, almost 900 seats in that venue. And we turned that into a standing room venue that also, I guess, the skill part of the question, or the story. We went there to do Rock for Hunger 3. And when I met with the owners and the people that ran the place, they're like, hey, we noticed you do concerts. We are doing community theater, and we don't make like a ton of money doing community theater. Can you bring some more concerts here? And if you can, we give you a really good deal on your Rock for Hunger festival. And I was like, win-win. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sort of first concert I booked there was a band, two reggae bands called the Soja, who's like pretty big right now, and then the Supervillains were like a big reggae band out of Orlando at the time. And that's the most money they've ever made at the bar. And they're like, how can we do more of this? So I was hired. I got a job, and I became their first talent buyer. And long story short, I then became eventually the talent buyer for House of Blues in New Orleans for their smaller room. Then kind of went the teaching route, and that's when the podcast started. And then I also worked for AEG. I got sucked back into the industry from 2018 till just recently due to COVID. They had to lay a bunch of people off and furlough a bunch of people. But basically been in the music industry on the concert side and production side for 14 years, booking and producing concerts. And the podcast is kind of about like the music industry mostly. I'm trying to expand more now, but the podcast is kind of geared for like interviewing the leaders of the music industry that are behind the scenes and like the artists. That's kind of the tagline. It's behind the scenes and the spotlight. Kind of sharing just their stories, their journey, and also sprinkling as many lessons as possible so people can listen to the podcast and actually learn something that they can apply. So it's kind of a little bit of the story.
Yeah, you just said so many things, just sparked so many memories for me. The
good old days.
Yeah, the other thing you do also have also kind of came into contact with artist management, right? Because I know that you worked to some extent with a local singer-songwriter, and then now I think you officially announced you're working with eTurn, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I started in artist management right around the plaza, around 2010. There was this annoying college student at the time that just kept calling me every single day, trying to get a job. And one day I finally picked up. We had an interview, hired her on the spot. She immediately became like my runner. That's like a pretty important position for running shows. And she wrote a song because she was like really inspired by like the artists that played there. And I kind of knew she played music, but it was mostly covers. And then she wrote her first song, but didn't want to show it to me because she thought I was very critical about music. And a friend of hers showed it to me that also worked at the Plaza, and like, you have to hear this. And that artist was Emily Kopp, who's now Lowen. And I was like, wow, if this is the first song this person's ever written, like, how much more can there be? So I literally like started managing her from the first song until about 2014 when I left House of Blues, and she went on a sabbatical to travel the world. And then I managed an artist named Zach Deputy with a local management company. So one of my mentors is this guy, Randy Dees. He's the managed Creed, Seven Dust, Alter Bridge. At the time, I was managing Paramore, working a little bit with Data Remember. And I was so naive when I started Rock Fonger. I emailed and I was like, hey, can Alter Bridge play this festival for free at UCF? And he was kind enough to actually reply and invite me for lunch. And he's become a mentor. And pretty much anyone I manage now, I kind of manage with him kind of as my mentor. So when there's things that I haven't experienced, that like negotiating a major record label deal, he has done that stuff. So I can lean on him to help coach me through those things.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that. I just wanted to give some context to everything that we're going to talk about regarding the podcast. Sure. And obviously, I'm a little biased because obviously I am in the middle of all this in a way or another, kind of very hungry for all of this knowledge also because it's kind of very pertinent to me, but I'll try to stay on script here for everyone else. Like I said, just kind of want to reiterate for everybody, welcome once again. If you have questions, make sure you address them to the chat here, and we'll try to look there and make sure that we're keeping track of everything. I guess you kind of already answered the second question that I had, which is like, it is sort of very, you kind of have your hands full with the whole concert management and managing artists and all these things. Why do a podcast? Like, what was the ignition for you to do that? Like, why?
When I started teaching, so around 2015 or so, 2016, I was looking to move back to Orlando, and a friend of mine was like, why don't you come teach at Full Sail? And I was like, I'm in my early 30s. Like, what do these kids want to learn from me? And she's like, are you kidding me? He's like, when you come speak as a guest speaker, you're like their favorite guest speaker. So why wouldn't they hire you to be a teacher here? I was like, all right. I gave it a shot, and I put my application, or I guess she sent an email out to someone that I know that over there. And she reached out immediately. She was like, do you really want to work here? I was like, yeah, if you think I'd be a good teacher. She's like, absolutely. And that was my interview. I was hired.
Oh, wow.
And I wanted to, it's just like a quick call. Hey, do you really want to do this? But I mean, of course, I've known the people there and they know me. So in a way, I guess I've interviewed for years over there. And I wanted to create something. Again, being a big fan of something right before I was a big fan of music, and I went the music route. I was always a big fan of podcasts. I go on long walks in the morning and listen to podcasts. I'd drive in a car and like for hours from New Orleans to Orlando, would listen to podcasts the entire time. And I wanted to create something for students that I feel like that didn't exist at the time, because for as a teacher, you try to find a book to go with your course. And I didn't feel like there was a really good book to go with an artist development course. So I wanted to interview people that did that as a living, day in, day out, and provide the podcast as a resource. So when we first started, I think I was only one of 2 or 3 music business podcasts. I was one of the first ones. So I wanted to create that resource. And I guess one thing I wanted to mention, I was really hesitant to start the podcast at first because I have Tourette syndrome, and I don't know if the listeners can hear, but sometimes I make this vocal sound, right? And I get very self-conscious about it. But I was like, if I have kids one day, what are my kids going to think if I ran away from something I really wanted to do because of a disability? So I wanted to show that even with the disability, you can still, do whatever you put your mind to and still build something that's successful. So I didn't want to let Tourette's hold me back.
Well, I'm grateful that you had the courage to do it, because the content is awesome. I can speak again, with my own bias, but I found many of the episodes and everything very useful and insightful. And I think, not necessarily plugging the show, but I know that, from my personal opinion, I think it's also very nice that you have met a lot of the people you interview, and that makes everything very real. I really appreciate that. So you're getting the information, you're getting the things you need, but you're also getting to see and understand the people who are there. So I find that very just very valuable and inspiring as well. So
speaking of, I think Gabrielle Fernandez that's here. I think that's the Gabby from Olympia Theater. If it is, what's going on, Gabby? And she was on a podcast recently. That was a fun episode.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Well, hello. Thank you so much for being here. All right. I actually wanted to kind of show a little bit of your branding before we continue here. So I'm gonna attempt to share the screen here. So let's see.
I have some things pulled up too, if you want me to share those.
Sure, we can do that. I just kind of I wanted people to see your branding a little bit so they can recognize it.
Yeah, I have my Photoshop open.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I can really give you the inside look on how it works. You guys see that? So
yes.
One thing, and that's, I guess when it comes to branding too, I am a big believer in trying to automate as many things as possible, especially we're all busy. Podcasts, let's be real, doesn't make a ton of make any money unless you have thousands of listeners, right? So I have to do other things to make a living, and then the goal is try to systematize everything as much as possible to make things easy. So these are basically my templates. This is a template when I have clips for YouTube. This is a template of the podcast episode cover for YouTube. Yeah. And then this is a template of the episode cover on all the podcast platforms. But basically all I have to do is just change the number episode, the person's name, and the photo. And it's just real quick. So it takes me just literally seconds to update the content for a new episode. So I just want to share those things real quick.
Yeah, no, I actually believe that, I think part of the lesson of today's talk is consistency is important, not only on content delivery, but on branding, and so that people can recognize your work. And so that's kind of why I wanted to show that. I'm sure if there's anybody out there who's starting out, this is an important lesson, especially now with social media being so prominent. Especially in this moment with this current circumstances. So I thought that was pretty cool. I personally like sort of the pop feel, 60s pop feel of the branding. Yeah. So that's pretty cool. Yes. So thank you for sharing.
I'm a giant comic book fan, which is what that inspiration is coming from, old school comic book pop art. I have a question.
Yeah.
What graphic sizes do you have? I showed you have one for the podcast. You said one for YouTube. What do you make sure that you have as a minimum? You want to make sure you have a Facebook banner, or and when you do your new episodes, how do you go about making sure? What's the minimum you think graphic different sizes, because what people don't realize is that you got to resize your graphics. There could be a Facebook banner which is horizontal versus the Instagram square. And so what do you think is the minimum for anyone doing podcast branding, the minimum amount of graphic requirement, different sizes that they should bring to the table when doing each episode and when branding their own podcast?
That's a great question. So I try to keep it pretty simple, so it's not way too much different types of graphics. So I have three main ones I use. It's the square, that's 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and then the widescreen like video image, that's 1920 by 1080 pixels. So 1920 wide, 1080 tall, and then I just have for like Twitter, like tweets, or I use Squarespace. So when you share like a post from Squarespace, it has like that little graphic on top and then like some text on the bottom of what that post is about. So that I have an image that's, I think it's 1200 by 400, 1200 wide, 400 tall.
Very wide.
For that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very wide and very narrow. Right? So those are the three main ones that I really use. And I haven't really had to use any others. But yeah, and I've tried to create these templates. So it's really easy to just go in and like swap things out versus like having to recreate it every single time, which I used to do in the beginning. I used to literally recreate every cover from scratch. I was like, why am I doing that? It's just simplify my life a little bit. And
I guess a follow-up, how important is it, or can you discuss the importance of developing a logo for your podcast? What kind of graphic requirements do you have for a logo, and kind of logo tips as far as like making the overall podcast aesthetic brand graphics and making sure that those are locked in, because those are already locked in your templates, and then you update the background cover info for specific episodes.
Right. Yeah. So logo is super important. I have read this really cool book called the 22 Immutable Laws of Branding. And in there, they talk about how either square logos or horizontal logos are the best, just because of how we naturally read things. If you have vertical logos, like tall logos, those are like kind of the worst types of logos to use, right? So always go with a square or a horizontal logo for starters, and try to keep it simple. I actually think mine could be a little simpler, or maybe I could have like a second version of it. And the reason to keep it simple, what I mean by that is, if you have to make the logo really big, then it's no problem. But if you make it really small, for example, like as small as when you go on your web browser and type in the website, right down the left corner is sometimes the company's logo. And
Webicon, the Favicon, or the Webicon or Favicon thing.
Yeah. And if you have a lot of text or like detail on your logo, you're not going to be able to see that when it's tiny, right? So either make it super simple so you can have the same logo be really big and really small, or have a second version of your logo that's like the small, tiny logo, but that still looks so similar to your main logo that people know, oh, okay, it's the same thing, right? So that's important when it comes to logos and branding, and then also the colors that you use. I love using, looking up, like, if you just Google the psychology of colors, then you can just like look at like Google Images, and it'll show you some really cool infographics on what like people associate, like with which feeling and emotion people associate different colors with, and then kind of try to think about, okay, like don't just pick your favorite color, right? Find a color that evokes the emotion that you're trying to get out of people with your logo, but then also if there's a very obvious direct competitor to what you do, try to not use the same colors that your competitor uses. So, for example, like the easiest example is Coke and Pepsi. If Pepsi were red instead of blue, then everyone would probably still associate Pepsi with Coke, right? So Pepsi went the opposite. Coke was already red, Pepsi went blue. So kind of just thinking of it as simple as that.
That's a really good tip. I had never thought about that.
And for your logos, do you use Illustrator to make sure that you can resize them? That's kind of like a technical note.
So I started with Photoshop. Now, with what I know about Illustrator and just, I guess, video and animation and everything, now I try to use Illustrator. So for, I guess, a little tip for future, if because you're going to start very small, very simple. You only start with the knowledge you have. And then as you keep doing this, your knowledge is going to grow. You're going to learn new things. But if you can do your logo in Illustrator, and even like what I'm getting to is when you want to animate your logo. So if you want to animate your logo, you're going to have way more flexibility the more layers you have, right? So if you have like the letter or the word making it, I make I would, not this logo is old, I have to make a new logo, but I would make every letter its own layer, because then I have 100% control. If I want to animate the logo, then every single letter can move in different directions and different planes. So I for using Illustrator now, knowing what I know today.
That is a pretty good piece of advice. I in my path, making my own posters sometimes and things like that, I've learned a lot of those things. So on that note, I'm gonna kind of ask a question that I think is sort of like one of those things people always ask, but I think is going to be really useful for this. If you can give me the top 3, or if you must, top 5 things you wish you knew when you started the podcast with the knowledge you have now, like what are 3 or 5 little things that you're like, I wish I hadn't, or I could, like you said, you're trying to be more effective all the time, like
2 or 3 things. So there's 2 obvious ones that come out. So when you start your podcast, right? When I started, I knew it was education focused, because like I was a college professor, and I still am today, and I wanted to teach. But I also know my other focus was entertainment. In the beginning, it was very broad. I was like, if you look at the beginning episodes, I interview an entrepreneur, I interview a guy that owned an MMA team called the Black Zillions. I interviewed people in wrestling and music, all areas of entertainment. And that's actually where I'm going to eventually slowly like build back out to. But the main audience, my students, were music business students and musicians. So I was like, okay, like at the end of the day, you always have to serve your audience, right? And serve your audience what they want. But the mistake I made when I did that, I went under the category education versus music on iTunes. And once you set your category, you can no longer change it. It's like set for life. Hopefully they'll change that one day so you can change it. But the struggle with that is, if I were to have been in music, I probably would have ranked a lot in the music top 100. But in education, I'm competing with trying to learn Spanish, trying to learn French, trying to learn German, trying to learn Chinese, and then like multiple podcasts of that, right? So if you go to the education category, it's all languages that dominate that category mostly. So I kind of like, I guess, put myself in like a corner. Like I can't like really go up on the education chart rankings when I could have gone up on music chart rankings, which is like a little bit of downloads. So that is important. And the other thing I wish I knew is more of like a marketing tip. When you go to like Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast platform, it's the same is true for if you're a musician, right? And you have music on Spotify. If you are a YouTuber and you have videos on YouTube, you can go on Fiverr, spend $5 and get thousands of views, plays, downloads, and whatever. And I did that to help boost me into rankings. And I did rank a little bit on the education chart. And that's when I learned, man, if I'd been in music, I'd have ranked like top 10. However, the downside of doing that is when you go to those platforms, you also get associated with similar podcasts, right? So for me, I should be like compared to like Promoter 101, CD Baby, DIY Musician, all these like music podcasts. But instead, if you go on a similar podcast of mine, it's a football podcast, a comedy podcast, a religious podcast. And it's because I bought those fake streams in the beginning to like help boost the podcast with the launch. And it's been 4 years and I'm still associated with the wrong types of category of podcasts. And because of all these new podcasts that have popped up in the music business space, I've actually fallen behind when I used to be ahead. So I guess the warning here is never buy fake streams. Yes, it works and you're going to get the views and the downloads, but you're similar to is going to be messed up for years. Again, it's been 4 years and I'm still trying to recover from that. And the same is for musicians. If you buy fake streams on Spotify, now when you go to Also Sounds Like, the artist you also sound like might have absolutely nothing to do with your genre. And that really hurts you in podcast rankings and music rankings. Because you're not paired up with similar stuff. And you also go, if they make like a special playlist or something, you do it for podcasts too. Here are all the music business podcasts. I don't get, and those are like, algorithmically created, are not manually created. So on Apple Podcasts, I never get paired up with the other music business podcasts because I did that 4 years ago. So it's like, one of the biggest lessons I had to learn. I hope nobody ever does again with any kind of content you guys have. So there are 2 lessons. I was trying to think of a third. If you want another one.
I mean, those are very important. I mean, obviously, in sort of like the race for numbers, you can be tempted to make those decisions, and you're trying to make it work. But that's a very good. I think those two bombs are pretty good. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
So you think you're being smart, and it doesn't really work.
Trying to trick the system, right? And it doesn't work.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. John, do we have any questions in the chat, or do you have one question?
No questions in the chat so far. I actually don't have any. That was all new information as far as just like how the importance of choosing the right thing set up wise. So I'm still kind of marinating on that. So we're good over here.
Okay, cool.
Another tip I have for waiting on questions is also start video right away for the podcast, right? Like most people do audio only, and I think you should start video right from the gate. And I know it's hard when you do it in person because then you really need some gear, like your cameras and stuff. But if you're doing it over Zoom, like we're doing right now, like you're recording this, like we can literally throw this on YouTube now, right? And now it's available in video. And the reason I say this is because of YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world. And if anyone's searching any kind of topic that you have podcast episodes about, now it's on YouTube and it's coming up in this YouTube search. So I feel like doing video immediately right out of the gate for your podcast is really important, so you can have that extra content on YouTube.
Thank you. That's a really, really, really good tip as well. I know that one of the projects to handle here at the Mero Center is another podcast with an award-winning engineer, and we have tried to implement the video all the way through. We just kind of did it instinctively. But it's good to know, to confirm that idea. So thank you so much. I know that I've been bombarding you with questions. I'm kind of like waiting for the chat to comment. But one of the things, and I know this might be counterintuitive, one of the questions that I thought of was, how has your background? I mean, obviously, for what I see, obviously your background has definitely contributed greatly to the content of your podcast, because you went for something that's natural for you and that is in high demand for those who need it. But how has your background limited you? This was something that I will ask. Like, obviously, it has contributed the inspiration and the content, but has your background limited you in any way for the podcast?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of course, being in the touring industry, I know touring very, very well. But when it comes to things like, so in the music industry space, when it comes to things like licensing, publishing, copyrights, like legal stuff, my knowledge could grow a lot more, right? Even with marketing, like as a concert promoter, I know how to promote concerts, but I know how to promote concerts the way the rest of the industry knows how to promote concerts. And in the music industry, I would say about 90% of people don't know how to market. They're advertisers, not marketers. So advertiser is you spend money to promote a show, and that's it. That's not marketing. Marketing should help be able to make money for a business or for the way you do shows, right? So those are like things my knowledge set was a little limited in the beginning. But because of the podcast and realizing that, I can now try to find guests who are experts in those things and interview them and learn from them. And I can like learn from their content, because I do probably close to, on average, I'm doing 2 to 4 hours research on a guest. But if it's like a bigger guest or if it's a topic I'm not that familiar with, I do probably close to 10 hours of research. When I interviewed Kevin Lyman from Warped Tour, I did it was like a whole week, almost like 20 hours of research I did for him. So I try to go really deep so I can have good conversations with the guests, and then also draw out information, right? Because just because I've done the research and know information about the guest doesn't mean the listener knows that. So the more I know about the guest, I know what questions to ask, so I can present the lessons that I want the listeners to learn from that guest. doing that's also changed my mind about a lot of things on how the music industry works.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
All right. Checking the chat. Do you have any inquiries?
Chat's kind of quiet. Chat's still quiet. I guess the follow up is kind of even like an add on to your question. How different is marketing no matter whether it's virtual or because you do a lot of shows like local kind of in your face venues, like what was the learning curve specifically in like switching to like now everyone had to forcefully kind of take their business from work from home? Like how was that learning curve being used to marketing in face-to-face venues and then kind of bringing that to more of an online streaming thing? Like how different was that for you, and how long did it take you to really kind of, okay, I've mastered podcast marketing or online marketing?
Mastering it's going to be a while, right? It's something that I think takes a lot because digital marketing is always changing so much. But I think just watching like one YouTube video and then going to create a Facebook ad is the wrong way to do it, because a lot of people will say, I've heard a lot of stories, especially from musicians, where they say, I've tried running ads on Facebook and Instagram and it just doesn't work very well. So then they give up on it. Or what most people in the music industry do, they'll take a flyer and they'll promote that. And they spend hundreds of dollars just promoting a flyer. Like how often have you or anyone that's like listening ever clicked on something just because of a flyer? Most of the times we're going to click on something because of a video, right? A video really grabs the attention a whole lot more than an image does, especially if it's an image with a bunch of text on it. So the learning curve was learning how really digital marketing works and really going into the platforms and understanding what every little thing is and how to actually build audiences and retarget audiences. That was the biggest thing to learn, how to actually become a marketer and not an advertiser. And I took some courses on that. I took courses on how to build ads on Facebook, Instagram, and then I'm starting to do stuff on YouTube because I feel like a lot of people overlook YouTube just because Facebook and Instagram is so easy. And YouTube does take more money, right? So on Facebook, you could do an ad for $1 a day. On YouTube, it's going to have to be more like $20, $30 a day. So it's more expensive to promote on YouTube. But I think that's why a lot of people just don't mess with YouTube, because even their platform is more complicated, because on the Google Ads platform, you can promote posts on Google searches, on YouTube videos, on websites that use Google AdSense. Like, there's so many endless amounts of places to promote through the Google platform, which is why I actually think that's probably the best platform to learn and master, because if you can master that, Facebook and Instagram's easy. I think that, it just took a lot of time taking courses, watching videos and experimenting how digital ads actually work, and I can actually make real fans versus just promoting a flyer, right? Because one last thing I'll add to that, I could ramble on this topic forever, but everyone that doesn't know who you are, like what your podcast is, what your show is, what your business is, like they're all considered a cold audience, right? And if you put something in front of them, depending your approach and how you put it in front of them, it's usually spam, and people don't like to get spammed. So you have to almost figure out how can they discover you versus like spamming them. So you figure out who is your most ideal audience. You really go deep into what are the demographics and the psychographics of that audience. Like if they were to walk into a mall, which stores are they walking into? What are they buying in those stores? Then when they go to the food court, where are they eating at the food court? If you really know your ideal customer to that level, and even while they're walking around the mall and they have their phone open, what apps are they playing around on in their phone, right? If you know your customer to that level, you can really target them like really, really well. And it's pretty easy to figure that out. But once you know who your ideal customer is, and you start running some video ads to them with no call to action, no links, which I know sounds crazy. It's just like, just get them to watch the video and don't ask them to buy a ticket. Don't ask them to click on anything. That's how you make yourself more like discoverable versus spamming. And now that cold audience now like warms up a little bit. It becomes like a little like, kind of like a warm audience, starting to warm up. And And then what you do, you just start running retargeting ads where you retarget those people that have already watched the first video with more educational content about what your business is and what you do, to like warm them up even more. And the more warm that audience becomes, then when you hit them your call to action, buy this, click this, listen to this, view this, they're more likely to do that because now they're a warm audience.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to add that.
I have my own follow-up question, and we have another question from Anna. Well, first, because I'll piggyback off the same thing. What's a good? What would you consider a good podcast marketing budget, like monthly? And because I know you mentioned that Google Ads is a good starting place to begin getting comfortable with online marketing. What's a good budget? And kind of like breaking down, like, okay, percentage-wise, you should spend this much on Google Ads and this percentage on Facebook, and then over time, a good kind of starting place to get the ball rolling.
It all depends on like what your goals are, right? If you're trying to make like the podcast something that's like making your money and that's lucrative, of course, the more aggressive you can be, the better. But of course, it all depends on what you have, like what you're able to spend. So at bare minimum, I would say $100 a month, and that's not much. So I would probably just utilize that towards Facebook and Instagram to start out. But if you can get a little higher to like a $500 monthly budget and up, that's when I would start dipping into the YouTube bucket as well. I would probably do majority of it still towards Facebook and Instagram, just because it's so much easier to reach people on those platforms and retarget people on those platforms. Mm-hmm. But I would start boosting some of my content on YouTube as well. So I probably would allocate, I'd have 500, let's say 300-400 towards Facebook and Instagram, and then 100 to 200 towards YouTube. And as that number grows, of course, more towards YouTube until it eventually becomes a little more even. And YouTube, all I would do, so all I'm like doing now is when a video comes out, I might run an ad for $20 to $60 just to boost the video a little bit, get some more views, get it in front of people who have similar podcasts. The cool thing with YouTube is you can literally hand pick out the videos that you want your ads to be shown on, which is a really cool feature. So I just have a giant list of similar podcasts or similar content creators on YouTube, and I target their videos, and then it's a specific guest. So recently I had Clinton Sparks on a podcast, who's a famous like hip hop producer. I actually didn't target a podcast. I only targeted videos from Clinton Sparks as from advertising. But for me, really, and the reason I said it all depends what your goals are. For me, I spend money on marketing really just to experiment and learn. I don't really do it too much to like grow the podcast. Like I don't have a monthly budget for the podcast because like now like my main job is like my main priority, like my client work. Like my clients should have 100% of my attention. Because I'm dumping that attention onto me and my podcast. Then my clients are gonna be like, dude, like you forgot to do this, but you had time to do this for your podcast. So my podcast is actually more of a word of mouth thing. And me experimenting with ads, my main like ad focus is on my actual clients. So that's why it depends on what your goals are with the podcast. If you want to monetize it and you want to really grow like as fast as possible, the more you can spend on marketing, the better. And at minimum should be $100 a month.
Follow-up question from Anna. Hey, hi Chris. Is it possible to have your podcast under different categories? For example, educational, comedy, and history, or can you only have the one label forever?
Hey Anna, thanks for that question. So now, there's two main podcast distributors. There's probably others, but the two main ones are Libsyn, Libsyn, and then Anchor. Right, those are the two main podcast distributors. And on Libsyn, I actually noticed now you can have up to 3 categories for your genre, but whatever your main one is, for at least for Apple Podcasts, that's what it's going to rank as for Apple. On Spotify, your different categories are going to show up. So yes, you can have like multiple categories, but for Apple Podcasts, only the one you put first is the one that really matters. So whatever you put on the first position, make sure it's maybe not as specific, right? Like where I was like, music education being the important part. So I went education, where probably I should have went a little more broad and have done music instead of education.
Cool. Thank you for that question. I did have one question regarding. I believe I'm under the impression, you may correct me if I'm wrong, that you had someone assisting you with some aspects of the podcast. Is that true? And if so, what does that other person do?
Yeah, I do. I have one of my best friends, Jason Trostler. He's the producer for the podcast. He produces every episode, and super lucky with that. Right, I am not a techie person. I'm getting there. I'm getting better at the techie stuff, but it kind of makes his job so hard for him. I just basically record. Like 4 years later, I finally learned like where my levels should be. And he's probably told me this like dozens of times before, but there was a way he showed it to me just this last time where it like really clicked. And I was like, oh, that's how I'm supposed to set my levels. But like in music, they have this thing, this saying where a good producer can literally turn, I'm trying to use a cleaner word, we literally turn poop into gold. So I feel like I hand over poop to him and he turns into gold, makes it sound really good because he comes from that radio world. He's been producing for radio for, I don't know, probably like 10 years now. So he really understands like audio, like talking audio, like not so much maybe like music, but like when it comes to like editing talking and producing talking, he's amazing at it. There was one time I had an interview where it was at the backstage of a venue. You probably noticed when you cut the beach in Orlando.
Yeah.
And if you're in that dressing room, you hear everything that's happening on stage.
Yep.
And we're doing the interview during the sound check, and the bass was so loud that I couldn't even hear my guest like answering the questions. So I was kind of just trying to like do my best I could, just trying to kind of pick up a couple words and like read his lips. And when I handed this over to Jason, I was like, man, this is gonna be so bad, rough for him. But thankfully, because of the gear I had, and you probably know way more about this, but there's like microphones that are omnidirectional and unidirectional, right? Is that the right term? And I think the ones that are unidirectional are like only picking up literally like what's in front of the mic versus like what's around it. And because I have one of those mics, it didn't even pick up the sound check. Like all it picked up was our mouse being like right in front of the mic, and the podcast episode sounded amazing. So it's like where having good gear comes in really handy.
Yeah. Cool. So you have help with the production of the podcast and on the audio technical side. That's cool. That's one of the things, obviously, we are really into. You know, I'm a sort of audio head, and obviously John is an engineer. So yeah, definitely. I guess that's one of the things that we always try to emphasize is sound quality. Some of the things that we talk about in the other podcast sessions, the podcast clinics, are talking about like gear and little things. Of course, Zoom is sort of not my, let's say, favorite audio platform. But yeah, definitely understanding a little bit of that technical side is going to make a big difference. So that's something very important and helpful.
What do you prefer over Zoom?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, what do you prefer over Zoom for video recording?
I think Zoom's hook obviously is the video part of it. Right. I know that internally, John actually suggested to use a platform that I really like personally because of the audio quality. It's called Source Connect. Source Nexus is a very, it's almost like if you were in the studio, over the internet. So that's really like the sound quality is like very different.
It's ISDN level quality over IP level stuff. So Source Connect and Audio Movers. I use that as an engineer to have virtual mix approval sessions, but they also have other platforms where like you can record remotely. And especially with this whole pandemic, people are doing that now. Many of the services require tech savviness on both sides. If they're going to be recording, but there are options to where your guest user can have like a web browser. But it does require like a web browser. They need to set up their mic correctly because, I mean, you can only idiot proof it, but so far. So like they have to, set up everything correctly and then it'll sound amazing. And there's also there can be levels of like in anything, even in Zoom, like when you try to add on here and your internet's down or your internet's moving slow. So there's levels of that, and that could lead to some frustration. But there are Zoom doesn't have the full CD quality sample rate,
Right.
and so like trying to make it sound hi-fi and real it's not it's not possible. But then it's just a podcast thing. So you work with what you can, but there are other more ISDN level quality options that if both people can sit down and work on the technical, it can yield just slightly better. And I think more so because I'm involved and listen to a lot of podcasts of audio engineers talking about techniques, and if it doesn't sound good and it's a bunch of audio engineers talking about achieving good sound quality, then that's kind of just like, oh God. Yeah. so that's it. Like, so when I listen to like the Production Expert podcast, it sounds super clean, and they're all remote. One's in England, when they're in different parts of the UK, and you can hear everything super clear. So yeah, those are some other options. But I do have some questions from the chat. Gabriella asked, Chris, do you think you will ever expand to setting up your own podcast channel or network? I believe you're, and then also a person, I guess their user account just says owner, but owner asks is what kind of podcasts have really taken off? So
for the first question, for Gabby's question, it's like I always I guess dream big, right? When I did the first Rock for Hunger Fest, I imagined like the South by Southwest in Florida, though, for charity and for a cause and with a purpose. So we also thought about like this thing called the Dream Center, which was going to end homelessness in Orlando and provide education for at-risk youth. So I always like try to dream like massive, and it's good, right? You should dream big. There's a really cool quote. If I don't know who said it, but if you're not dreaming big enough, then or if your dreams don't scare you, then you're not dreaming big enough. So I always like try to just fantasize and set these super massive, ambitious goals. So a podcast network is definitely something I've thought about. And it'd be cool to have like a network that would be many different areas of the world of entertainment. So that becomes like the entertainment network, right? When you come to the Making It brand and Making It Academy, you can learn about music industry, about podcasting, about the movie business, about theater, like all these different categories. So that is like a vision I have. If we'll ever get there, we'll see. Time will tell. And then the second question, what kind of podcasts have really taken off? I think interview podcasts work really well, but of course that's one of the also most common types of podcasts. So there's more interview podcasts out there than anything else. But those tend to be the podcasts that rank the highest, right? Or like educational podcasts on very specific topics. And like, especially when you go really deep on those topics, like there's one called Hardcore History, where it's literally like 4 to 8 hour episodes on a topic in history. But you know, the guy that runs it, he's super well researched. He's super knowledgeable. He scripts out most of it. Like he has like a giant script that's researched and fact checked and everything. So that's a really cool podcast. So I don't know if there's necessarily like a certain type or category that does well. I think if you do an interview podcast and you have interesting guests being done by an interesting person or a person that people are interested in, somewhat of a celebrity character, so like Joe Rogan, that's probably the biggest podcast out there. Tim Ferriss has a really big podcast. So they're all interview style podcasts. So it's usually by people that have gotten some kind of public recognition for what they do, and they're interviewing interesting people, right? I haven't seen a ton of podcasts where someone is just like a really amazing interviewer, and because of their interview skills, they've grown. There's a few out there. Who's the guy who was interviewed by Tim Ferriss before? Cal Fussman, amazing storyteller. And he has a podcast. It's not like ranked in the top podcast, but he started getting recognition, one, because he was on the Tim Ferriss show, but then two, because he's just such a great storyteller. So I guess ultimately, what you want to learn how to do is how to storytell. I think the best storytellers have the best podcasts. So all the examples I gave, right? American History X, maybe Joe Rogan's a little more random. Tim Ferriss, all these podcasts, they have some kind of story to it. So if you can think of a beginning, a middle, and an end, and where your middle maybe has like think of like the hero's journey, where there's some kind of climax at the end. It doesn't need to be super dramatic, but like your podcast should have somewhat of a format versus just being super random. You can be super random. Of course, it works for Joe Rogan, but he's also Joe Rogan. I mean, he's like was a giant star before the podcast. So yeah, can you have some kind of direction, some kind of flow to it? That's important.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, John.
I've just kind of, after reading the Spotify deal with Joe Rogan, that I kind of just recently kind of got into his podcast. I knew he was there, I just never was a fan. But one thing that's kind of is super abnormal about Joe Rogan is his episodes are really, really long. So format-wise, I think the sweet spot is like an hour, or if you could do it shorter, like because of attention spans. What do you think on that? And it's so surprising to me. And what are your thoughts on how Joe Rogan is so successful with this podcast that it literally takes like a trip to New York just to finish a couple? Like, it's a long podcast.
Yeah, I think the sweet spot is so. I guess the first thing to think about, why do people listen to podcasts, right? And most people listen to podcasts either to be entertained or to learn something like educational. Those are probably two main reasons why people are listening to podcasts. What I started turning to podcasts a lot more than like radio or TV, because on radio and TV, everything is in sound bites. Especially like right now, politics, right? We're all looking at 1 minute, 3 minute sound bites of everything and then making giant decisions based on these sound bites, where I feel like the long format where you can really go deep with a guest and really learn who your guest is, learn where they're coming from, and then draw out tips and lessons from those guests. Those are my favorite podcasts. And I know maybe I'm a little bit more of an outlier than most, but I think, and from having done all these interviews now, I've had guests that only had 30 minutes, and I've had guests that were like, however long you need, Chris, like whenever the podcast is over, it's over. I feel like the ones I've had the flexibility of time, those tend to be the best podcasts, because one, we take like the listeners on a journey, and I'm able to draw a lot of lessons out of those guests. And it varies, right? It depends on how long-winded the guest is, or how like short, or maybe they're really short with answers. So I've had podcasts. I think the range is anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half for me. We can go really deep, but I feel like when it's a really interesting podcast, if it's 2 hours, that doesn't bother me. I don't know about others, and I don't mind stopping a podcast in the middle and taking it back up on my next walk tomorrow or something. But I feel like to really get the most juice out of the guest, hour to hour and a half is probably where the sweet spot is for that.
I kind of was gonna jump in on this topic that I actually agree that there are many different formats. Of course, I personally really enjoyed this, like, the interview format, because of the same reasons that I said that I enjoy your podcast and some of the other ones I listen to, and some of the ones that we're making. But I also really enjoy, like, the NPR style storytelling. There are a few podcasts I've listened to where they only dwell on, they really go into like a movie topic and they just talk about it for hours, and it's just really I don't know, informative, and I also enjoy that one. So in reality, I think the storytelling, I agree, is probably the most important core element of it.
Yeah, I think that's what makes someone stand out, right? It's something that I still try to get better at every day, but I can really tell when I listen to podcasts now when the host actually has like a structure to their podcast versus it just being random. And structure doesn't have to mean you prepare for 8 to 10 hours. It could be like 5 minutes before you start a podcast, and I've had to do this sometimes just because of time, I jot down a few bullet points, and then I kind of just reorganize those bullet points to where there's a flow to it versus it just being completely random. But I think that's just the most important part, to having a flow to your story, like a story to your podcast.
Cool. I think, do we have a question in the chat? I think he says,
I'm sorry. I was about to answer it. It just asked if podcasts are ever live, and I can answer that one easily. Yes, some podcasts are live. I like my example right now would be off the top of my head, Pensado's Place. He has a normal airing time, which he does on YouTube Live, and then it's also saved under his channel, and then also streamed as a podcast via audio. So you guys can add on to that, but that was a pretty easy one. Podcasts are live; they can be streamed live, just kind of like a normal show. Like I think they air that specific show that I'm talking about. They air like on Thursdays, and then he also, like, the next day it will then pop up in his channel, pop up on his other feeds, pop up on social media, and also pop up as an audio content. But he also, I know for a fact, there's like a team of like 20 people on that show. It looks like it's just him interviewing some really world-class mixers, but when they actually kind of pan to the show, there's like full-time staff. They're in a huge studio, so it's quite an endeavor over there. There. You guys can add on to that if you want.
Yeah, I think there's a big mix to that, right? Between if it's live or if there's a lot of editing. It's funny because like my YouTube version versus like my audio version is completely different. Or my YouTube version is more live. Before it used to be no editing. Now I do like a little bit editing. But then the audio version is probably like super edited. Because like Jason has like literally, when sometimes I have guests like just like really ramble a lot about different things. Or they might tell a story and then get sidetracked and then tell that story again later down the interview. He's gotten like so good at taking stuff from later on in the interview and moving it up to where they're telling that story, but making it sound natural, like it was like meant to happen that way. So I didn't get that detail. For literally someone is taking stuff from somewhere else and moving it elsewhere.
Yeah, the storytelling aspect and also the audio aspect, So you would have to, if you want to have a live, natural feel to your podcast, you're going to sort of sacrifice that scripted aspect, or you could do like a mix, script some things and then just improvise on some others. That's my favorite, like just kind of in the middle, have some structure, but just feel that you're flexible. If you need to go places you didn't plan to, you just go there.
Exactly.
To add to that, kind of I kind of treat it like my background's also in radio, so like I kind of treat it like a show production. Like they have usually the co-host, like there'd be like a host and then maybe like a co-host, and they're kind of like watching the clock, kind of transitioning interview wise, kind of like, okay, let's talk about this, or let's go to this segment. They may have like different segments in the show. Like again, Pensado's Place is a good example because it's very structured. They have like, okay, like Herb is the co-host. He'll do like the opening sponsors, then they'll go into talk, then they'll go into like a batter's box. So they'll have different things where the co-host kind of comes in and says like, okay, so let's segue for the open Q&A segment of our show. And then they kind of have that. So usually probably a host and a co-host, where the co-host is kind of watching like the technical details. Kind of like how this is going right now, like, like that second person on the show kind of doing like those segue interjections.
Right. Yeah.
Usually helps to kind of keep the structure.
I need one of those.
I think on that topic of the length and whatnot, I think we are sort of hitting that area where we're fulfilling our time. But I kind of wanted to let people in the chat, if you have any final questions you want to ask, we'll give you some time to think of those. I do have one question. Maybe in a way you already answered this. I'm not sure. I just wanted to ask it. In your experience with the Making It with Chris G podcast, has your audience taught you any lessons? Have you learned any lessons from the audience? That's what I would like to ask.
That's a good one. I wish my audiences would be more engaged. They definitely listen because I see obviously the number of listeners and they're going up, and I see like in the reviews as well, like the reviews are going up. The lessons I've learned from the audience, more like what questions people have about the industry, right? What are the things that they're struggling with? And I see a lot of common questions people have. So that kind of helps me figure out what kind of guests to bring on the show, because that's the most important part. If it's something that you're just doing as a hobby, have a completely free for all, do what you like. But if it's something you want to grow and build an audience, then you need to keep your audience in mind. That's like the number one thing, right? Like no matter what kind of creator you are, like what field you are, like you have to serve your audience. The cause of your audience has to be more important than the cause that you're trying to push if you want to please your audience and grow your audience.
Okay.
It looks like Gabby wants my baby as a guest. He's sounds like he's co-starring in the background.
Yeah, you're. I guess I'm not really sure since I'm not from the U.S. I sometimes say things in strange ways, but I'm not sure what the expression is. But you're a new father, a recent father. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah. 5 months.
Yeah. So congrats for that also. But that's the beautiful soundtrack we have in the background for Chris is his beautiful baby. So.
He's made a lot of podcast appearances already.
I have a question from the chat. I guess owner asked to Chris, what are your favorite podcasts?
So on my Apple Podcast, I think I have 50 podcasts. I don't listen to them all every day or regularly. So once I probably listen to at most episodes, be Tim Ferriss. Say, one, I love the books that he has, like the 4-Hour Work Week. I love his interviewing style. I've learned a lot about, I think, interviewing just by listening to how he interviews and how he structures interviews. Sometimes he'll do like solo episodes where he's just kind of just teaching lessons and kind of talks about the structure that he has. So one thing, really important lesson I've learned from Tim Ferriss is never start off your podcast with questions that your guest probably gets asked frequently, right? Because what happens, you immediately set them on autopilot, especially if they're guests that do a lot of interviews. If you ask them questions that most people ask them, they've already got their sound bites like prepped and trained, and they're immediately going to go into their sound bites and say the exact same thing they say on every other podcast as well, right? That's something I've learned when I do like research on my guests. I'm like, oh, okay, they're answering these questions over and over and over again. So don't ask those questions, especially not in the beginning, and then figure out how to ask those questions differently so you can get like different answers and maybe even more depth than anyone else has had before, right? So I love Tim Ferriss and his style of interviewing. I'm a Joe Rogan fan. I listen to Joe Rogan as well. I'm also a Gary Vee fan. I listen to his podcast, which almost has like no format at all. It's just complete free for all. His is one I listen to a lot. I have a few music business podcasts. I listen to what else? I listen to all the Bigger Pockets podcasts. That's like more like in the world of real estate investing and investing world. That's kind of what I'm starting to get interested in a lot. And health podcasts. I have quite a few health podcasts. I listen to Ben Greenfield. It's my favorite. And then the Model Health Show with Sean Stevens is another good one.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing those.
Yeah.
Well, I think we are hitting the time limit we had. I think we've spoken about everything from your beginnings to marketing to branding to best practices. I guess the obvious closing would be anything that you want to share with aspiring podcasters out there, like any final words of wisdom that you want to impare. So please, mic is for you.
I mean, making money with a podcast is not easy, right? Especially if you don't come from the celebrity world. And really with anything that's a creative outlet, like whether it's music, whether it's art, whether it's movies, TV, film, theater, like any creative art that you're passionate about, do it because you're passionate about it and because you love it and it brings you joy, right? That's the most important reason why you should do a podcast, because you love the topic so much that you don't care if you make no money for it, if you ever make money from it, because you just enjoy that topic so much. And I think that really shows, right? If you really enjoy the topic and enjoy the guests you're talking to or the topics you're researching, you're doing more of a standalone storytelling type podcast. Like the listeners can tell when someone's passionate about it. And I think that is the most important part. Love what you do, be passionate about it, and try to always grow in that topic. So like for music business, I have 10 different music business podcasts I listen to. And even though a lot of them speak on topics I already have experience in and I've already kind of know what they're probably going to say, I try to check my ego, and instead of saying, oh, I already know what they're going to talk about, I don't need to listen to this, I still listen to it for that 5 seconds to 2 minutes of something I've never heard before, or something being explained in a way I've never heard before, because I learn from those things. And by learning and growing myself, I feel like not only do I become a better podcaster, but I also become better and more knowledgeable about my field because I'm willing to listen to other perspectives and how people explain it. So I think be passionate about what you do, and that passion will show through your podcast and my guests you invite. And it also shows because you're always a learner. So always be learning and always grow in the field you go into.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. John, do we have any final questions for Chris from the chat?
No, a lot was covered.
Yeah. I was telling Chris that we cover everything from branding to best practices. Well, being this moment, then I personally, just as usual, Chris, it's a joy to share time with you, even if we're not in the same room because of the current conditions. Thank you for your time, for being part of this. Thank you, John, for your input as well. I'm really grateful that we could do this. And thank you again to the Merrill Center for providing this platform for us to do this. I will reiterate that we have a couple of podcast clinics on September coming up on the 9th and the 16th. If you need help with setting up for your podcast, or if you need help with understanding a little bit of the editing best practices, those are coming up. And I think the last thing we're going to do is we're going to post links to Chris's iTunes and his blog so that you can, discover him if you haven't already done so. And once again, Chris, thank you so much for your time, for your attention, for being so awesome and sharing your experience with us. It's very valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo and John, for hosting me, having me, allowing me to share. It's fun to talk about something different that's not just music industry. Not too long ago, I had a class on how to start a podcast for my students. And I was like, what am I going to say? And once I started the class, I was like, oh, wow, I actually do know quite a bit from having done this for 4 years and having studied other podcasters. So thanks for letting me share from my experience today.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. So check out the chat for more information on Chris. Stay tuned for more awesome things from the Merrill Center. Once again, I want to thank my co-host, John, and Chris Goyzueta for being here. My name is Leo, and we are checking out. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you for attending, and hope to see you soon.